Story 1, Alcatraz Island, The Shadow of Evil. It was a cold, foggy night in 1937. In the middle of the San Francisco Bay stood a lonely island, Alcatraz Island, infamously known as The Rock. Surrounded by freezing waters with deadly currents, it was a place designed to be escape-proof. But what truly made Alcatraz terrifying wasn't just the thick prison walls or the ruthless guards. It was the darkness that lurked within those walls, an evil far worse than the criminals held inside. Carlos Mendoza, a notorious gang leader and ruthless killer, was among those sent to Alcatraz. Known for his cruelty and fearless nature, Carlos believed he had nothing to fear, not even death itself. He often bragged, "Death is just a word. I've seen worse." But Carlos was about to face something far beyond his imagination. He was placed in cell 14, the most infamous and dreaded cell in the prison. Guards whispered about it in hushed tones, calling it the death cell. The previous inmates who stayed there had all met strange, gruesome fates. Some had gone insane overnight, some mysteriously disappeared, and others were found dead with terror frozen on their faces. Carlos laughed at these stories, thinking they were just tales to scare weak men. On his first night, he sat in his cell with a smug grin, muttering to himself, "Ghosts? Demons? I fear no one." But that confidence didn't last long. As the prison grew silent and darkness swallowed the narrow halls, Carlos awoke to a chilling sensation. The air around him felt ice cold, as if an invisible presence was right beside him. He opened his eyes to pitch-black darkness, with only a faint flicker of light from the distant guard's lantern casting eerie shadows on the walls. Then he heard it, a faint whisper, hollow and cold, calling his name. "Carlos. Carlos." Carlos shot up, his heart racing. He stared into the darkness, but no one was there. He convinced himself it was just his mind playing tricks. But the whispers returned the next night, louder this time, accompanied by strange scratch marks appearing on the stone walls as if clawed by something not human. By the third night, Carlos could no longer pretend. He banged on the iron bars, screaming for the guards. "There's something here, something in the shadows watching me." The guards laughed it off. They'd seen it before. Prisoners in cell 14 always cracked. They claimed it was the isolation, the cold, the fear eating away at their minds. But what the guards didn't know was that something truly was lurking in the dark corners of Alcatraz, something ancient, feeding off the fear and misery of the damned. Carlos grew weaker with each passing night. His once fearless eyes were now filled with terror. He claimed invisible hands tried to choke him while he slept. Cold whispers filled his ears, and strange symbols appeared on his walls, symbols that he had never seen before, written in what looked like blood. One night, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the prison. The guards rushed to cell 14. What they found chilled even the toughest among them to the bone. Carlos lay motionless on the cold floor, his face twisted in pure horror. His eyes were wide open, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. Around his neck were bruises, deep finger marks, too large to be human. The walls were covered in dark, cryptic symbols, pulsating faintly as if alive. After that night, cell 14 was permanently sealed. No one was ever placed there again. Even the guards refused to walk past it during the night shift. Some said they still heard faint whispers coming from within and shadows flickering under the door, shadows that didn't belong to anyone. In 1963, Alcatraz prison was officially closed, but the island remains, standing like a sentinel in the misty bay, holding on to its dark, haunted past. Tourists visit during the day, taking photos and listening to tales of notorious criminals. But at night, when the fog rolls in, the island breathes again. And if you ever find yourself standing outside the sealed door of cell 14, lean in close. Maybe, just maybe, you'll hear a faint whisper carried on the cold wind. "Carlos. Carlos." Story 2. Alcatraz Island, the Cursed Prisoner. In the heart of the fog-shrouded San Francisco Bay, where cold waters swirl like the whispers of the dead, lies Alcatraz Island, an isolated fortress of stone and steel. Known as the Rock, it was a place where America's most dangerous criminals were locked away, their screams swallowed by thick concrete walls. But some say the worst prisoner to ever walk its corridors wasn't a man of flesh and blood. This is the story of Elias Crow, a name that even the guards whispered with fear. Elias wasn't like other criminals. He wasn't part of any gang, nor did he rob banks or kill for money. No, Elias Crow was something else entirely, a man surrounded by death, whose crimes were so vile, so inhuman, that even the newspapers refused to print the details. They called him the Hollow Man, because wherever he went, life seemed to wither away. In 1943, after being caught under mysterious circumstances, Elias was sent to Alcatraz. He never resisted arrest. In fact, he smiled during his trial, his piercing black eyes unsettling everyone in the courtroom. Witnesses claimed that when he looked at them, it felt like he was staring straight into their souls. When Elias arrived at Alcatraz, the warden decided to place him in Block D, where the worst of the worst were kept. His cell, D-22, was small, dark, and cold, located in the deepest part of the prison, known as the Hole, a place designed to break the spirit of any man. But Elias never broke. Instead, strange things began to happen. Guards started hearing whispers in the hallways late at night, even when no one was around. They found dead birds outside Elias's cell, their necks twisted unnaturally. Lights flickered when he passed by, and the temperature in his cell block was always colder than the rest of the prison. But the true horror began on a night drenched in thick fog, when Officer Grant, a veteran guard, was assigned to watch over Block D. Grant was known for his toughness. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses. But that night changed everything. As midnight approached, Grant noticed Elias standing in the middle of his cell, staring at the wall, completely still. Suddenly, without any warning, Elias slowly turned his head and locked eyes with Grant. "Do you believe in death, officer?" Elias whispered, his voice like ice scraping against glass. Grant felt a chill run down his spine, but shrugged it off. "I believe in putting scum like you behind bars," he replied. Elias smiled, a smile that didn't reach his hollow eyes. Moments later, Grant heard a sound, a faint scratching noise like nails dragging across stone. He turned around, expecting to see another inmate, but the corridor was empty. The scratching grew louder, now echoing from the walls themselves. Then the lights flickered and went out, plunging the cell block into darkness. Grant fumbled for his flashlight, his breath visible in the sudden cold. When he finally managed to switch it on, he nearly dropped it in terror. The walls were covered in strange symbols, dark, jagged markings that hadn't been there before. And standing outside Elias's cell wasn't just Elias anymore. There were shadows, tall and twisted, their forms writhing unnaturally like they weren't bound by the laws of this world. Grant backed away, his heart pounding. "This isn't real. This isn't real," he muttered. But the shadows moved closer. The next morning, the guards found Officer Grant's body at the far end of the corridor. His face was frozen in a scream, his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. There were no wounds, no signs of struggle, just pure, unfiltered terror etched into his features. After Grant's death, things only got worse. Inmates in Block D began to lose their minds, screaming about dark figures watching them from the corners of their cells. Some clawed at their own skin, trying to get them out. Others simply disappeared, gone without a trace, as if the darkness itself had swallowed them whole. Eventually, the prison authorities had no choice but to move Elias to complete isolation. His cell, D22, was sealed shut with heavy iron doors, and no guard was allowed to approach without backup. But even locked away, Elias's presence lingered. Story 3. Alcatraz Island. The Island of Blood. It was a cold December night in 1950. Thick fog blanketed the San Francisco Bay, and the relentless crashing of waves against the rocky shores of Alcatraz Island created an eerie rhythm. But on that night, another sound mixed with the waves: whispers. Faint, chilling whispers, as if countless invisible voices were trapped within the very walls of the prison, crying out from the darkness. This story begins with David Howland, a newly assigned prison guard. David was a practical man, grounded in reality, with no belief in ghosts, spirits, or anything supernatural. To him, Alcatraz was just another job, guarding dangerous criminals, maintaining order, nothing more. But David didn't know that the walls of Alcatraz held more than just prisoners. They contained the island's darkest secrets. David was assigned to Chamber 7, an old block that had been sealed off for years. No prisoners were kept there anymore, and most of the guards avoided it, whispering rumors of strange occurrences. The prison administration dismissed the stories as nonsense, ordering Chamber 7 to be reopened to ease overcrowding. The first night David, flashlight in hand, entered the block, the walls were stained with dark patches, the ceiling corners thick with cobwebs. The air was cold, not the usual damp chill of the bay, but something sharper, heavier, laced with an odd metallic scent. Like rust mixed with something else, something that smelled faintly of blood. At exactly 2 a.m., the flickering fluorescent lights buzzed and dimmed. David assumed it was just faulty wiring, but then he heard it. Soft crying, a faint sob echoing from the far end of the corridor. David wasn't the type to be easily spooked. He tightened his grip on the flashlight and moved toward the sound. As he walked deeper into the block, his flashlight suddenly flickered and went out. Now, in complete darkness, David froze, listening. That's when he heard a whisper, so close it felt like it was right next to his ear. "Can you see me, David?" His heart raced. He stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. When he picked it up and clicked it back on, the beam of light revealed something that didn't make sense, something beyond his worst nightmares. A face was floating in the darkness. Just a face. No body, no shadow, just a pair of glowing red eyes and a twisted, grotesque grin stretched wider than any human mouth should be able to. The skin was pale, almost translucent, with veins pulsing underneath like dark rivers. David screamed, the sound echoing down the empty halls, and everything went black. The next morning, David was found unconscious outside Chamber 7, lying on the cold concrete floor. His fellow guards said he must have walked out himself, but his eyes had been blank, lifeless, as if something had hollowed him out from the inside. After that night, David was never the same. He muttered strange things under his breath. "They're in the walls. They don't sleep. They know my name." His mental state deteriorated rapidly. A few days later, David was found dead in his cell. His face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, eyes wide open, staring into nothing. But the most disturbing part wasn't his face. It was the strange symbol carved into his chest, a symbol no one recognized, etched so deep it seemed burned into his flesh. The dark history of Alcatraz. After David's death, old prison records surfaced, revealing that Chamber 7 was never meant to house regular inmates. During the early 1900s, it was used for secret experiments, psychological tests conducted on prisoners labeled as mentally unfit. The torture was so severe that many of them went insane before dying violent deaths. It's said their spirits never left. Their rage, fear, and agony were etched into the very stones of the chamber. Anyone who entered risked becoming part of that darkness, their soul trapped alongside the others. Even now, visitors to Alcatraz today claim to feel an unnatural coldness near Chamber 7, even during the height of summer. Some say they hear whispers if they stand close enough to the door. Can you see me? And if you're brave or foolish enough to press your face against the tiny observation window, you might just see a pair of glowing red eyes staring right back at you.